The Vikings lived close to rivers, lakes, fjords, and long stretches of coastline. These waters shaped their diets, their travel routes, and their survival skills. Fish were a reliable source of food throughout the year, but tools were not always available. A traveler could lose equipment during a storm. A family in the mountains might not have access to proper gear. Workers at seasonal settlements sometimes relied on quick, improvised methods. When we imagine Vikings catching fish, many of us think of carved wooden hooks, nets, and iron tools. Those existed, but they were not always within reach. In daily life, the Vikings often turned to methods that did not require tools. The land around them provided opportunities. The streams carried fish during spawning seasons. The tide changed twice each day, opening and closing natural pools along the rocky coasts. Forest lakes remained clear in summer, allowing skilled fishermen to see movement beneath the surface. These natural conditions helped the Vikings build a set of techniques passed down through generations. Life in the north created an environment where people had to understand water deeply. Streams in spring were loud with snowmelt. Fjords remained cold even in midsummer. Lakes in the mountains were calm but unpredictable. The Vikings learned when fish hid under rocks, when they traveled close to the surface, and when they slowed down as temperatures changed. All of this knowledge helped them catch fish without the equipment we often associate with ancient fishing. The first method, and perhaps the most surprising to people today, was hand fishing. Vikings would enter shallow water quietly, keeping their feet firm on the stones beneath them. They moved slowly, so they would not disturb sediment. The key was to keep the water calm. Fish like trout, small salmon, and char hid under rocks or near the riverbank, where the current was gentler. A Viking would lower one hand into the water and slide it along the bottom, feeling for movement. This method was sometimes called tickling, because the fingers gently brushed the fish to encourage it to stay still. The goal was not to grab immediately. Instead, the fisherman waited until the fish relaxed. When the fish stopped reacting, the hand slipped under the belly. With one smooth lift, the Viking pulled it out of the water and onto the bank. Viking stories tell that older men often taught this skill to young boys. Hand fishing worked best during certain seasons. In late spring, fish moved toward the shallow edges of lakes to feed. In summer, they hid under stones during the hottest hours of the day. Viking fishermen knew these patterns well. They walked quietly along shorelines to spot shadows beneath the water. The second method involved spears, but not the kind used in battle. These spears were simple sticks, carved quickly when needed. A Viking would find a straight branch, remove the bark, and sharpen the end against a rock. The point was not as sharp as an iron spearhead, but good enough to pierce flesh. Lakes with clear water made it easier to spot fish, especially during calm mornings when the wind had not yet disturbed the surface. Vikings stood still at the water's edge, waiting for fish to approach. They held the wooden spear above their shoulder, ready to thrust downward. The movement needed to be fast but controlled. Spearfishing required accuracy, and accuracy came from practice. Boys often practiced with sticks long before they ever joined adults in real fishing. Hunters used similar techniques when catching small animals or birds. The ability to strike cleanly was useful both on land and in water. Sometimes Vikings crafted split-end spears by carving the tip into two prongs. A thin piece of wood or bone held the prongs slightly apart. When the spear entered the water, the prongs flexed and trapped the fish between them. These makeshift tools were easy to build and surprisingly effective. They required no metal, no rope, and no permanent equipment. A traveler stranded without tools could make one in a matter of minutes. Another common method involved creating natural traps. These traps were not nets or baskets, but shaped channels that guided fish into tight areas where they were easier to catch. Vikings often built them in streams where the current worked in their favor. They collected stones of different sizes and placed them strategically to create a narrow funnel. As fish swam down the stream, they entered the funnel and became concentrated in a smaller space. This gave the Viking a chance to grab them by hand or spear them quickly. These stone traps remained in place for months or even years. Families living near rivers would adjust them season by season. The traps worked best when salmon swam upstream to spawn. Archaeological sites in Norway, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands show evidence of these stone arrangements, which were carefully placed rather than natural formations. Vikings also created woven fish traps using twigs, reeds, and flexible branches. These traps took skill to make but did not require tools. The fishermen wove the branches into a funnel shape with a wide opening and a narrow exit. The fish swam into the wide end but had difficulty turning around or escaping through the narrow one. These traps worked well in shallow water, especially near river mouths where fish entered from the sea. The woven traps were often anchored with stones. They remained in the water for hours or overnight. In tidal areas, the traps worked automatically. At high tide, water filled the trap and carried fish inside. As the tide lowered, the trap remained above the waterline, leaving fish stranded inside. Another method involved using gorge hooks, which were some of the earliest fishing hooks used by many ancient cultures. Unlike modern hooks with curved shapes, gorge hooks were straight pieces of bone or wood. A Viking carved the piece into a small stick, sharpened both ends, and tied it in the center using animal sinew or plant fibers. The hook was positioned lengthwise along a bait, such as an insect or small fish. When the fish swallowed the bait, the gorge hook turned sideways inside its mouth and became lodged. These hooks were small, light, and easy to make. Another clever technique involved driving fish toward shallow waters. This method did not require direct tools, but relied on teamwork. Vikings entered the water in a line, spacing themselves evenly. They slowly walked forward, pushing fish toward the shore. The fish reacted by swimming ahead of them, but eventually reached a point where the water became too shallow. Once trapped in a small pool or near the bank, the fishermen scooped them up with their hands. This method worked well in calm lakes or wide river bends. It was often used when gathering large amounts of fish for a feast or seasonal preservation. Understanding fish behavior was a critical part of these techniques. Vikings knew when fish followed light, when they avoided shadows, and when they slowed down as temperatures dropped. For example, in cold water, fish moved sluggishly and were easier to catch by hand. In warmer months, they gathered in shaded areas under fallen trees or near overhanging riverbanks. Fish could also be caught using natural barriers. On rocky coastlines, pools formed during high tide. When the water retreated, fish remained trapped in these pools. Vikings walked along the shore during low tide and collected the fish by hand. These tidal pools could contain small cod, pollock, flatfish, and even crabs or shellfish. They often combined tidal harvesting with other tasks such as gathering seaweed, collecting driftwood, or checking boat damage. Some Vikings used bait lines without hooks. They tied insects, pieces of fish, or small strips of meat to thin strands of animal sinew. The bait floated near the surface. When fish attempted to bite it, the fisherman pulled quickly, causing the fish to catch between the teeth and the bait. If you're enjoying exploring the real Viking world, subscribe to the channel for more of its mysteries, engineering, and forgotten legends. Winter presented its own challenges. Lakes froze over, and fish moved to deeper areas. Vikings sometimes broke holes in the ice and used their arms to reach into the water. The cold was intense, but fish moved slower in winter, making them easier to grasp. Fish were not only caught for immediate consumption, they were also preserved for winter. Once caught, Vikings cleaned, salted, and dried fish on wooden racks. These racks stood near the shoreline where the wind blew steadily. The dried fish lasted for months, making them valuable for long sea voyages. Their connection to the natural world allowed them to travel great distances, explore unknown lands, and settle in places where others might struggle. Fishing was only one part of this larger picture, but it reveals much about how Vikings lived and how they understood their environment. Every method reinforced parts of Viking culture that focused on resilience, adaptability, and community effort. These fishing methods also reveal how Vikings viewed the land and sea. They did not separate themselves from nature. Instead, they worked with it. They used the patterns of the tide, the flow of the river, and the movement of the seasons to guide their actions. This philosophy appears in many parts of Viking life, from farming to traveling between summer and winter settlements. Archaeological digs in places like Hedeby, Ribe, Lofoten, and Iceland continue to reveal signs of fishing activity. Stone arrangements near riverbanks resemble the traps described by early Norse farmers. Bone hooks carved in straight shapes match designs used for gorge hooks. Even pieces of horsehair braided together hint at lines used thousands of years ago. The more archaeologists study these sites, the clearer it becomes that Vikings relied heavily on simple, natural techniques. Metal tools were expensive and took time to produce. A traveler couldn't always carry equipment. Nature, however, was always available. They understood that fish gathered near underwater ledges, between large stones, and along sandy patches. They observed how sunlight reflected off the water and avoided movements that created dark shadows. These small techniques improved their success rates when catching fish barehanded. The Viking diet included cod, haddock, salmon, trout, herring, and shellfish. Each species required different handling. Cod moved slowly in deeper waters and were easier to trap in tidal pools. Trout preferred cool, clear rivers and responded well to hand fishing. Salmon followed predictable migration routes and could be intercepted using stone traps. Herring gathered in huge schools near the coast, allowing Vikings to scoop them near the surface. These patterns helped shape coastal villages and seasonal camps. Entire families participated in fishing activities. Children learned by watching, and elders passed down knowledge quietly. The process was practical, not ceremonial, but it held cultural importance. Fish allowed Viking communities to survive long winters, support sea journeys, and trade with neighboring regions. Fishing without tools also had strategic value. During travel or exploration, Vikings might land on unfamiliar shores with no equipment. Their ability to catch food with nothing but natural resources kept them alive in unfamiliar landscapes. This skill made them more self-reliant and allowed them to travel farther than many other early medieval groups. Thank you for joining us in exploring how Vikings caught fish using nothing but their hands and the natural world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient survival skills, please share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know which technique surprised you the most. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you never miss a new story from the past.